And a very warm welcome to this next TED Talk. For those of you who are curious about what is this TED Talk, it is Transboundary Reverse and Reverse Ecologies and Development Studies Talk. These are series that are organized by TED's initiative at CPR. And this particular talk is a third in the series, what we call on the theme of water-centric master plan. This is part of a research that is right now that we are working on under this arrangement with the National Mission for Clean Ganga. We have an MOU with the National Mission for Clean Ganga to pursue research on the research and knowledge production to inform policy thinking about rejuvenating India's rivers. So it's one of those research projects that is interested in questioning the fundamental, engaging with certain fundamental questions about the statutory planning process in India, in the cities in India. It is about the master plan, which is often known as master plan, but there are also several other names, for master plan in cities. It is primarily about, it's a kind of spatial response to the challenge of urban planning in Indian cities. So the question that we are interested in is to basically look at the structure and rationalities, the way the master plan is organized or structured, and the kind of rationalities that inform this master plan to accommodate water-centric planning. Could be both rivers as well as stationary water bodies. So it's part of this series, and we have the third speaker here today, which is Professor Shashwath Bandyopadhyay from CEPT University. The earlier two talks were also, from, I wouldn't say that, Shashwath is not certainly, doesn't belong to that category that we actually aim at, because we wanted to, under this series, we wanted to bring in practitioner perspectives primarily. But Shashwath is also a scholar as well as a practitioner of urban planning. Someone who doesn't actually need introduction because he's quite visible, and he's someone who has been somewhat, shaping the discourse about urban planning. And those people who follow primarily, particularly CEPT University, I think he's one of those visible faces that brings in quite important insights into the urban planning practices. Is also, so just we were just talking before we went on live about he just returned from the recent meeting of the high-level committee that is engaging with urban planning capacity in the country. And some of those people who follow these views about it must have seen some of those very concrete steps that are being taken by the government of India about strengthening planning capacity in Indian cities. So quickly, there's a long introduction to Shashwath, but I'll just stick to some key points. He's a professor with 28 years of experience, and he's also in urban planning and generally something that I would say teaching as well as practicing urban planning in India. He's a project director at Center of Urban Planning and Policy, and also CEPT Research and Development Foundation. Is someone who has been quite actively engaged in various projects in South Asia in urban development sector, and with a focus on sustainability, climate and disaster risk reduction, integration of land use and infrastructure, nature-based solutions for managing cities. Shashwath is someone who has spearheaded several climate and spatial planning related research work, such as the GIZ-supported Sustainable Urban Development and Smart Cities, Government of Gujarat supported regional climatic variability studies, risk-informed urban development and building regulations, mainstreaming nature-based solutions in urban areas. as I said, he's also someone who has been supporting the high-level committee that has been established by the government of India. And he's, as I mentioned about it, he's not just someone who's a scholar, but also and teaches at CEPT University, but also engaged in quite actively in producing these practical solutions. And he's involved in developing several toolkits for generally in the space of sustainable city development. And recently, his work is something that is of particular interest to us. He has worked on protecting or otherwise incorporating ways of protecting urban lakes and water resources in cities. And there is a particular part of the work that we are quite interested in. I hope that he covers it in his talk. That is something that he has personally involved in developing this master plan for Bhopal city, if I understand right. So with that introduction, I request Shashwat, who is joining us, I guess, from Ahmedabad. Shashwat, you are muted, Shashwat. You can unmute yourself.
Thank you, Srinivas, and good afternoon, everyone. No, I'm very much in Ahmedabad, and thank you very much for inviting me. Also, quite an interesting subject that I was asked to reflect on. So, once again, also very happy to see it, because when I was told the talk is scheduled at 3:30 on a Monday, so I thought, who is going to listen to this at an odd time? But I see that generally we organize these talks on towards the mid or later part of the week. But
The usual troubles. That's usual troubles. Shashwat, if you can hear us, you've just frozen.
one,
Yes, you just froze. If you could go back to that part about, I think you were referring to the CEPT people, or a significant number of people attending this talk.
okay. No, I'm saying it's a quite encouraging to see both at CPR and as well as online. Many of our colleagues who have joined, or many of the practitioners who are joining. And you know that one background that why this is becoming more important for all of us to consider, that what are those environmental or water and climatic related challenges need to be incorporated. So what I do is, I hope this is audible in case.
Very clear, very
Yeah?
clear.
So let me first share my screen, and then I'll take you through some of my proposition for about 25 to 30 minutes, and then maybe we can open it up for a discussion. So let me know if this is visible to everyone.
Yes, it is visible and it is full screen.
Okay. So one aspect of it, which is, we are bothering all of us, both at my work with the high-level committee and the other spaces. One is the pace of urbanization that we are witnessing, and the kind of definition that we have, traditional. All of you know the five-fold classification, some density, population, occupation, structure. But if you see some of these nightlight images, the amount of build form that are coming, showing in and around a kind of larger center, the corridor that are forming outside the periphery or along the transport node. And many of you know the definition of urbanization also in European Union, also many countries like South Africa, which use this term called continuous built up area. They don't necessarily stick to the density and population kind of classification, but the amount, so it is showing a kind of tendency of peripheralization, and so a sense of de-urbanization, which is, so what happened here recently in the WRI had published some of their research in the geospatially showing this tendency that are happening and the kind of footprinting, the rapid urban expansion that are, taking in our cities. And if you look at some of the cities, whether it is Hyderabad, whether it is Pune, Delhi, for example, Ahmedabad, we were doing some work from our with CEPT. My team at CEPT was looking at how are they, what are the extent of peripheralization that are taking shape. And this is really, really large, I mean, just to put it in a context, that downtown Paris is about 110 square kilometer, not the metropolitan Paris. So every second year, you are building one Paris or down central Paris to that in the context of what Delhi is expanding. Now, I'd like to draw your attention to this diagram. This I keep showing at various places. What is happening here when this level of expansion happens? Because as nightlight data or various other, that we are basically expanding into the periphery because of lack of framework in the core areas, or we also lack some of the urban planning tool very clearly telling how to, re-densify, redevelop the core areas. So basically, we are seeing a lot of peripheral expansion. And the first sketch shows when this is a grassland or the green cover, how much water that percolates, how much water that gets infiltrated, what is the level of evapotranspiration. From there, somebody starts building a farmhouse. What changes it started taking in the local hydrology in terms of both hydrology system as well as microclimatic system? As probably some of you have seen, recently Center for Science Environment came out with a very interesting study that, what happens when you have a local water body? What is the typical influence zone or the microclimatic influence zone if you have a tree, if you have a water body? So what happens here? There is of course, change in the hydrological behavior. It is the surface runoff changes, ground infiltration reduces, and also there is certain implication of microclimatic. And then more and more areas gets, built up, and then it becomes farmer. I was just few of my colleagues were actually, were doing a quick rapid visit in and around some large cities in Gujarat, and we realized that both, remote sensing details data wise, as well as, when you do ground truthing, you'll see there is a large amount of growth are taking place where the planning boundary stops. So, that other countries probably when you draw a planning boundary, you see a lot of growth is contained within the boundary. But where the moment you do a planning boundary, many of this like industrial, some of the smaller enterprises, industrial parks, some of them start, and these phenomena are causing havoc both in the hydrological system as well as microclimatic system. And as they categorize very severe, critical, number of warmer days, as well as whenever there is a little bit of rainfall, we see certain amount of flooding. And this was earlier, we were not really so concerned about it because it was happening less frequently and the damage was more localized. But since past decade, we are seeing increasing frequency. And this year, particularly the relentless heat in many cities, both in, daytime temperature, also nighttime temperature. And all of you know that our share of economy, we have a large heat intensive labor in our cities. Could be your construction worker, could be your housemate, could be your, our vendors. And this year, there is a collective, recognition that something is really changing. And this is what I think large amount of, if you see some of the assessment done with, remotely sensed image or other images, the changing temperature, changing localized condition of urban heat island, also some of the research which was done by World Bank and World Resources showing some of the, large heat and water stresses. And this image is from, that's another side of it. Once when there is a summer, it's an intense heat. Particularly, many of us are presently, in our offices, converting ourselves, comforting ourselves with HVAC system. Both heat and flooding, the people who are at the front lines, people who are, at poorer socioeconomic conditions are getting affected. Now, these challenges are recognized and increasingly felt all over. Now, the point here is, and in response to that, what has been happening is that we are actually coming up with a large number of sporadic tools, because our statutory plans have always remained in a very, it has always been evolving. There are large number of cities are not covered. They are at different stages where, these plans have been evolving with a capacity, which was Niti Aayog's report, and later high-level committee report also has highlighted serious shortage of planners and preparing. So as a result, there are a lot of tools, a lot of, projects which are, has come up, which is, said like, let's make this place more resilient, or let's make this place. But the point here is that in a city, in our context, the statutory planning tool, in spite of its, limitation, in spite of its coverage number, it is the only tool probably available both in controlling the growth, appropriating land for public domain. Also, it gives you a mandate to intervene in the public domain. You can control, you can do, certain amount of. So what is happening here is that because of the inherent weakness of preparation of these plans, we have moved to a separate, like, I was one city, I don't want to name. So they have prepared 18 separate plans. So somebody is saying, you put something blue and green, somebody is saying do this, another person is do, and all of them are, coming in the different point of origin. So instead of, giving a clear direction, probably we are now making the space more a kind of a confusing state. And all of us know both our cities and town planning departments are struggling to provide a kind of a, both in terms of human resources, their capacity, and also the ability to plan. So let us look, why, in a sense, why this statutory form of urban planning, if you look at, because we are working in multiple states looking at that, because whenever I go to many seminars, people generally take as a master plan and development plan as a tool that will solve all our urban problem. Like they say, urban planning is not working if there is no rainfall, or there is, there are some issues of traffic. And urban planning, like Srinivas and I, we are generally very kind people. So we often accept the blame wholeheartedly. But urban planning is a tool which is a limited sense. It has a limited purpose. If you see many other countries, many well-functioning cities work on, different pillars, like governance pillar that gives you policy mandate to work. Then there is an urban planning, which is a, medium to long-term tool which provides a framework for public goods and services. It gives you a, allows you to do an order development to minimize land use conflicts, incorporate public interest. Most importantly, this is a tool also allows you to manage negative externalities. Certain, because of certain areas, go zone and no go zone. And then you have this is another very important tool where you can apply development control regulation to a private plot. So one, it allows you to appropriate land for public purpose. It also manage certain amount of control, regulation that, also manage nuisance. Lastly, this tool also allows us to, this is a potential tool for land value capturing. I mean, all of us know that, our urban areas are underinvested. The kind of growth, various estimates by Dr. Isharjaz Ahluwalia Committee, McKinsey Global Institute, recently World Bank estimate, has clearly shown that, we need to apply more and more land use planning tool to capture this value. So one is that we have a governance, urban planning, which is typically a mid-term to longish term tool, and then day-to-day management of our services, like, whether traffic is not flowing, wastewater is, there is a leakages, and that's generally comes from the domain of urban management. All three together, function. But what happened is that urban planners have become a kind of a, poster child of all, challenges in urban areas, and they said urban planning is not working. So this is what, and that tool, we need to actually relook at it, see how much we can, load, and how much, what are the kind of, because if you say urban planning can do everything, so there was a very famous quote saying that if everything is planning, then probably is nothing. So, we end up saying that urban planning, A bhi kar dega, O bhi kar dega. Probably we are anticipating, expecting too much. So we have to say what are the, scope for planning and what is happening in our context. Because this is a state subject, and this tool is developed based on the, states, particular town and urban development acts of a particular state, and also the capacity and, the kind of growth that are there taking place. Although we have a very national guideline, some of you, those of you are planners in this would know this, because these are taught very extensively in non-planning school, but not practiced in real life. If you see, these are kind of an URDPFI guideline. It was visualized, that there will be an hierarchy. There is a tenure, long term, short term, there would be a hierarchy of plans, and then, how they could be responsive to this. But presently, if you go to many cities, like, many large states, either they don't prepare the plan, or even they do prepare the plan, just one instrument, something called master plan, where very hurriedly some land and use controls are given. And more than planning or development of, see, one of the purpose, a key performance indicator of plan that we keep discussing, that what do we say this plan is working? The ability of that plan to develop in public infrastructure, the ability of that plan to appropriate land for public purpose, and also manage certain amount of nuisances. But what happens here is that most of the plan, you'll see that there are large amount of plans are being prepared in hurriedly, etc. It's just used for merely, controlling some land use and building permission. So many town planning department in the state, because of lack of capacity or historic reason, they do less of planning, more of building permission or infrastructure work, less of that amount. So this is what happens here. Because of this, now what we have, we are generating a large amount of, the statutory planning tools, their hierarchy has remained in a very complex situation. There's some cities called comprehensive plan, development plan, master plan. Some states also has regional plan at a larger level, particularly state like Maharashtra. There is also an element of zonal development plan, and most cases I see this was not really taken forward. And at some states like Gujarat practices as a town planning scheme or a local area. But because of these planning tools are at a different levels of development, most cases, the component of infrastructure investment, component of environmental aspects, if you take these documents, so they are not really, covered in a great sense. There would be certain chapters just devoted. There would be, this is the demand of water supply, or this is the demand of solid waste management. but they fail to create what is called the purpose of a planning is that they fail to create a kind of a investment pipeline or an infrastructure pipeline at a city level. Also fail to develop an investable projects, because some of these projects could be, attractive to a private sector. Some of them could be attractive to a CSR, etc. It's just some statements are done. Similarly, the environmental concern, like for example, in spite of, relentless heat and flooding, I was just looking at some of the planning document for a particular state. There is one paragraph saying climate of this place is, high is 30 degree, high is 45-degree, low is this, and average rainfall. And that is the statement comes in this kind of statutory form. Neither the team or even their consultant don't intend to hire or onboard a large number of professionals that would be required. Sometimes their budgets are also don't allow them to hire those kind of, because if you are prepare a budget, it's just, drawing some roads and putting some colors, etc., etc. Don't put, meaningful. And as a result, what happened is whenever, we generate certain concern, sometime it could be, city heat resilience plan, and we generate large number of non-statutory instrument. And there is no problem in the non-statutory instrument, but they will not find a support, because generally they are external aided. Sometimes, they are supported, but the moment it is non-statutory, and you want to apply those non-statutory tool in the public or in, private domain or eminent domain, you will find a lot of challenges to apply them. So even if you prepare a large amount of, let's say, blue-green plan, if it is not mandated, because I'll come later, and because Srinivas asked me to show 2 case studies. So I'll show what are the key challenges, when we are saying with all our good intention, all our, motivation, we are preparing this plan, but unless until they're backed up by certain condition, we will be struggling into this. So, this actually I would request team for CPR. This is, we have created a museum of, those plans. So sometime it is master plan, sometime is zonal plan, and, you can see there are, different stages of evolution, etc., etc. Since I'm connecting from state of Gujarat, I just wanted to show this is what it means by a statutory plan, which is, the Act of 1976 shows this mechanism, allows you to prepare a larger plan and certain element of local area plan. Now, the idea is that if you want to really, incorporate environmental concerns, or if you wanted to, put some of this water sensitivity, it is not one plan that is going to fit all. It has to be at different level. Sometimes your solution could be, I think, Srinivas, you would recall that early 2000, most of the development control regulation, we were propagating about rainwater harvesting for a plot of certain size, 1,000 or 1,500 square meter, because something which can be held up within the plot boundary, or, some of the cities across are using blue roof or cool roof where water can be harvested. Something which is at a larger level, which probably needs to do at a neighborhood level, both water and certain amount, and then which has to be at a larger level. And we have a lot of very interesting case studies, all of you know, so I don't want to show those slides. Like one good program which Singapore runs is active clean and beautiful cities program, and several others into this. But in our case, this was the research done by CEP Research Development Foundation, and we are working to see what is happening and what are the kind of, scales of planning, the nomenclature of this plan. And so some of the state we picked up, some of the smaller development plans, smaller town, looking at the scale, comparative, looking at their content, and we realize they are so diverse. And many of them, for example, what you understand in regional plan in Maharashtra vis-a-vis what you understand in Gujarat, or master plan in Delhi versus, Bhopal, they are very, very. So what is happening presently although our guideline, URDPFI guideline clearly mandates that there is an hierarchy of as a regional level, urban level, at this needs to be at a certain level. Generally, the larger the plan, the lesser the details and more guiding, long range. And this was actually done by my colleague, Mr. York Hansen, who was leading a team at GIZ that time, and both of us were, we were actually started looking at, that how this spatial planning hierarchy needs to be maintained, because one needs to feed to other. But presently, if you see, only some urban master plans are prepared, some cases zonal plans, some cases some cities like Gujarat, which is very intensively doing some TP scheme or certain local area plan. So this scale is missing. Because as you know, both water is a transboundary subject. It requires large catchment to follow. So if you just pick up one built form and say, okay, let's make it water sensitive, or just take some, adjacent area of a lake or something, then we are just, responding to a kind of very, very more sporadic calls and not looking at the subject. And that's the challenge that I think we need to look at it more comprehensively if you're really, we are looking at more seriously into this. I was particularly doing a research comparing some of the urban planning laws and legislation in India, Germany, Brazil, and South Africa. And I found this is a very interesting mix which Germany does. So it is one side, it is a formal planning, a very similar land use planning that we follow, federal, region, state, district, but we only do this the city level. And then they have a certain amount strategic planning, and this both the tools combine, because strategic planning is responding to constantly changing. Today it could be affordability, tomorrow it could be climate resilience, day after tomorrow it could be heat. So your formal planning system, which is based on the cadastral, because always remember that statutory planning is the place where the rubber hits the ground. This is based on actual cadastral basis on which you can go on built up. Otherwise, if you give any proposal, they remain, on the air, but this cannot be, because your proposal you are giving, zoning proposal, we are giving certain areas and they remain. So I find that approach of bringing both formal and strategic needs probably a good mix to look at for countries like India. South Africa also does a very similar thing, which is, very interestingly done at different scales of planning in this. So this is the what I wanted to share with you, that we are expecting a lot of from the master planning and urban planners, but we have not really invested enough, developing these tools. So so whichever states, if you speak louder, then say, oh, mera plan mahan, or somebody say, no, our is better. This kind of competition goes. But in real sense, if you look at some of the environmental performances, if you look at some of the livability criteria, you'll see most of our cities are falling below 140th and below downward. So we need to really improve. And that's what a forum like this, and thanks Srinivas and in CPR for taking this off, because we need to deconstruct this tool and ask ourselves a little bit of hard question into this. As suggested, I just wanted, because to bring two cases. Now, what happens, that when you are looking at a large natural resources and you want to bring to a kind of formal planning system. So I wanted to showcase a couple of cases. One is about Bhopal and another is in East Coast, where the city gets flooded, a city of Bhubaneswar. I wanted to share some of our experiences, particularly Bhopal. I have been associated over a decade now, and there are a lot of challenges. Some things are happening. Now, as you know, Bhopal is endowed with one of the stunning man-made lake. The lake itself is about roughly 36 square kilometer, fed by a river called Kolans, and the catchment is roughly spread and roughly about 350, 360 square kilometer, encompassing about 100 villages. But if you look at the master plans or statutory form of plans, they generally responded in earlier version just to, that this is a land use control, there is a lake, and we have this, like in old days, in environmental planning, we used to say solution of all pollution is, dilution and dispersion. So in planning also, we do any environmental, we just start putting any environmental issue, let's put a buffer. So we do some, very naive form of buffering, putting them certain green cover, etc., without knowing that whose land is this, how to maintain this buffer. Most importantly, all water bodies are catchment oriented. So no matter if you, do 90, whatever catchment buffering, whatever buffering of the lake, if you're not maintaining this buffer of 100 villages, then that happened in a very stunning day in early 2000. The lake got dried. So so if you this, so when you analyze, and many of you are working in GIS, many of you know about it, so you know these are the land use, land cover, but the problem is how do you put. So if you want to safeguard this lake of 36 square kilometer, you need planning tool which allows you to transboundary to districts, 100 villages, also put certain amount of restriction. And we have some of this archaic thing, we use development control and we put no-go zone. And if the no-go zone happens on a private land, then what is the compensatory mechanism? And during that time, we had a very enlightened leader, Dr. M.N. Bhuj, who is no more, unfortunately. So a lot of work was done to see how, this kind of, stormwater credit, because this element of fiscal instruments have not developed in India so far. Some element I'll show later in Telangana and some of these places where they're doing certain amount of green TDR. Also, these are in US and other, there are a lot of, stormwater retention credit market, etc. But this is when we were doing this exercise, there are hardly any, even if a lot of people came and said, give them TDR. But TDR basic precondition is that it will work only when there is a real estate market. Who is going to, take a TDR, which is, village or, semi-rural kind of context. So this is one challenge, that what will happen, how this kind of, spatial planning tools and regulation can be applied, and then it will be made meaningful into this. One of the larger point, what we also realize, that there are large amount of drainage channels, because of over a period of time, these drainage channels were, either got blocked, either got developed certain order. But it is still very important that certain amount of drainage channel needs to be protected. Now, to protect them, and essentially if you put the, the land, the private land, the ownership of tenure, you'll see that, so how do you balance them, and what kind of regulation, what kind of, so that we are interested, managing this water body. We can do some webinar, we can do a lot of seminars, but we have to start grounding that whose revenue plot is this, what needs to be protected, and some element of modeling which was done, and some of you use hydraulic HEC models, etc., would be able to understand this. But how to protect those things are very, very important. How to, we want all the hills and greens to be protected, and how this kind of just saying, just 50-meter buffer or 10 meters buffer. Okay, so now we are looking at, while doing this Bhopal exercise, we started looking at the regulation at other places. State-wise, how are they vary? And look at it from here, you see the amount of, this buffer and setback for minor water bodies, and they're varying, all states. I mean, any state, any location, you start looking at, sometime it is 9 meters, sometime it is. One is that there is, this buffer is dependent on the return flood or floodable area. Second is that, if you put a buffer of 15-meter or certain areas of that nature, 9 meter, you are essentially entering into a private land. And if you are taking, asking somebody to, say don't build or, less build, then how are you going to, compensate in that area? So those are the kind of challenges. As a result, we are unable to maintain this thing. So this was one aspect of it. The second aspect of it, there is an extended area master plan, and this city is highly, highly vulnerable to flooding. Not only that, cloudburst. There has been 3 cloudburst event in last 1 year itself, and high groundwater table, high drainage, kind of surface drainage, and chances. Now, when you prepare, there is a traditional way with the old data. You start looking at how much vulnerable, how much flooded, etc., etc. You can prepare a plan like this. But again, the important parameter is that you do the detailed assessment of those drainage layers. Where are those drainage layers? And general tendency, we are using many of the planning school, we use SRTM data, which is free and open source data. But those data are very hypothetical. These are, you can't do a drainage plan with this of a 30-meter or 90-meter kind of this. So you have to, invest in creating understanding where are those drainage, what are their points, etc., and need to work out in those elements before you actually start looking at it. The next part of it, that this building regulation. The first part of the building regulation is that you have to start looking at what are those water sensitiveness. If you have a canal, probably, your building footprint has to move back. But when I move back, but I should not compromise with my development rights. Okay, so, some kind of compensation of moving back or using the setback I am allowed to do, those kind of regulation needs to come in certain aspects of it. Like this, you get an extra FSI to deal. Some cases, like, I'll show an image on Uttarakhand. Some cases we start building on stilt, because you both your boundary wall and the building, if you're covering your groundwater, ground coverage, then you'll start diverting the river, the water flow in a different matter. And also you have to create these whole aspects of TDR and credit. One good part of it is that the guideline which Telangana government has come up, and understanding of a different water bodies, etc., and then how. And the second, they also started creating this what is called green TDR. Sometimes road, water bodies, conservation, and some framework is being, like in Ahmedabad, there is certain framework of heritage TDR, more conservation oriented TDR, and certain aspects of how this can be transferable from one place to another, because natural resource areas are not really good for real estate development. So you have to find a mechanism which is still evolving in that direction. And then you actually start putting up those, areas, what kind of development, Now, this is where a planner's judgment is required, because I know a lot of, somebody who comes from the environment and conservation domain, they said, oh, no, don't develop. But this is the, you have to do certain amount of trade-off here, that where would you allow, how much would you allow, where the insurance companies, you need to ask development, because if the whole city is flood prone, then, you have to apply, you can't say no go. Certain amount of go, semi-go of that nature needs to be put together in these aspects. This is I am Kashipur. As you can see, this is the boundary, and then this is you can allow the water flow. You can put it on the stilt, building can be put on the stilt, many of the catchment area. Now we need to put a lot of work, and we have to come out of those rhetorics of what, that this is water sensitive urban design and stuff like that, and start playing around and come up with a lot of regulation which is practical, where you will be able to do certain amount of work, and then also embedded in your statutory planning processes, kind of thing. Lastly, some countries like, they come up with a very innovative tools. Like, one is, I saw in Urban Redevelopment Agency in Singapore, use something called green plot ratio. I go to a lot of town planning department, they're obsessed with FAR and FSI. Nobody is looking at what was the pre-development and post-development landscape in that area, or that landscape deficiency in an area. And some tools which are really simple, practical, people can actually easily embed it, can be taken up, because both blue and water has to come together. You can't say this is my blue and that is my green. I know one planning, after all land is are allocated, last corner plots, as a ceremonially, they put this is my green plot, which has no connection. It is almost inaccessible. Some left out lands are given, and then say oh, this is my green plan, etc., etc. So this needs to be twined. Lastly, this is another what Singapore does quite a bit of, is called landscape deficiency. And you identify areas where you can prioritize both blue and green. Fortunately, Indian Road Congress, IRC, SP, both 42 and a few others, are now propagating. They have come up with very strong guideline, what is called cloudburst and sponge street, water sensitive street. And surprisingly, many of our urban planning team members are yet to wake up with that. The guidelines are very well done, and I see some of the application. I'm showing both side two images are from our gift city, Gujarat, and the middle was in Cloudburst on Copenhagen. And this gives a great details how the water sensitiveness can be done. And so these are the kind of images which can be taken up and taken forward. Lastly, we have a lot of opportunities for using some of this fiscal tool, both carbon credit, green credit, or stormwater retention credit, or any elements of credit that will allow our those kind of compensating the landowners and creating kind of a win-win situation. Now, if you're living in Bhopal, you want to enjoy the lake, but you can't ask the the villagers, but you don't grow and then let us enjoy. So you bring a parity and sense of equity in the whole development process. So with this, I wanted to thank all of you, particularly CPR team, especially Srinivas, Debashish, and others. So over to you, and I'd be happy to hear your comments or any question. Thank you.
Thank you, Shashwat. That's really a great combination of certain conceptual issues and the empirical information. Before I move on to the questions around the table and those questions online, I have a request. If you could quickly comment on that point. You mentioned about this variety of tools that are available, and just the way you had shown in the last few slides. Now, you've been someone who, for instance, have worked on Bhopal Master Plan. Has there been a certain kind of post, ex-post evaluation of those propositions? For instance, you talked about buffering, around the lake in Bhopal. Have you had a chance to go back and see how much did it work? And any reflections on what kind of learnings that you had?
Right. I think this is very important, Srinivas, because now before Bhopal, I had the opportunity to work in the East Kolkata wetland also. Now, there are two different origin of this. For example, when the Bhopal Upper Lake Master Plan started, it was not synced with the Bhopal Statutory Master Plan. So Bhopal Statutory Master Plan started much later. So, but at some point of time, the government realized that they need to come together. But as you know, the development plan is still at the draft stage. It has not been notified. So government, based on the work done by us, so they have already put up certain areas, certain regulations at a kind of till the master plan takes place. So there was some attempt. This was done to bring it together, both land use statutory plan as well as the catchment plan. But how much it is effective? Because what we do in most of this master planning exercise that we do, we don't generally invest in post planning, or there is a periodic review. we have now given that as a build-up because I am also critical. I'm giving certain amendment. We are working on the town and country planning regulations in couple of states. What we are saying, giving them this framework of post planning, once the plan is notified, a framework of review and framework of revision. Because once the plan is done and then everybody said, oh, we have achieved created a Taj Mahal. It is not. A plan has to be constantly monitored, reviewed, upscaled, and at times it's also not possible to revise it every second day. Both legally, there are a lot of challenges. So we are creating this. But as I said, this is a very emerging area because first, bringing environmental concerns in planning school, this is quite well taught. And some of you, those who have worked in the spatial planning, zoning atlas, etc., etc. But when you start implementing it, I was sharing an environmental planning program at CEP. We used to do all our studios around that. But when you start working at that, the much of stakeholders and the issue is water, forest, climate, environment is a whole of government issue. It's not, and planning, many of the statutory land use plan originates from the town planning or urban development department. And in generally their ecosystem, this is one of the weaker ecosystem. So to answer your question, Srinivas, that no, we have not gone back. We are only happy that we are able to bring them together to two agencies to talk to each other. Results and outcomes, yes, to be monitored because it requires a large water body to be monitored more frequently. More importantly, some of my other work in Odisha and West Bengal, I saw there is a saying in China called death by 1,000 cuts. So whenever these large water bodies, there are a lot of fringes which are open to, manipulation, they're open to changes, it's not visible. Slowly every day somebody, cringes in on that area. So it requires a very robust framework or resource allocation. So we have to come together. One is that we need a conversation around that how to, improve our statutory planning tools to respond to this, also be aware of the limitation of this tool. Sometimes we go gaga about this thing, this plan will do everything. It's not possible. This is a tool. We as a planner, all the young planners, those are seated with you and all in the audience, we also must learn to recognize that, what this tool can do, what we could not do, and where other tools should be required to make it happen. But we are starting this journey. We are good that you started this conversation around. Over to you, Srinivas.
Thank you, Shashwat. I have a whole bunch of questions, but I'll look around because otherwise it would be a conversation between you and us. So, any questions around here? I'll also go to the questions that I received online. But in the meantime, let's Pushpa.
I don't want to miss my chance.
Shashwat, can you hear her?
No, unfortunately, your voice is breaking. Can you come closer to the mic, please?
Oh, mic is right in front of me. Can you hear me now?
Please stay unmuted, Shashwat.
Yes, yes. Please go ahead.
Very good to hear you, Shashwat, after a long time. I have one question relating to insensitivity of master planning process, that many of the plans have built cities and parts of cities on water bodies and water channels. And that's a huge challenge. As a planners, we have not recognized and not tried to prevent in future planning process. So what is your response to this drawback? That's a short and sweet one.
Thank you for short and sweet, but very complex question. Because we have, frankly, we have not been able to respect, because most of our statutory planning process, and I also look at the people who are engaged in this, there was an obsession kind of perceived that we need to build more. more and more. And so, and without recognizing that after a certain time, there is a, there is a limit to, there's a glass ceiling of how much to build more. And this is everywhere. Whenever, if you see a planning boundary, the first thing a planning authority does, if your city is 200 square kilometer, they'll first draw a boundary at 500 square kilometer, 2x or 2.5x. And generally, I have seen that most of this team don't have qualified people who to deal with agriculture, water, or forestry, natural resources, etc. So the second thing is that many countries who does, like for I was doing this work in Germany. So what the planning team does, they don't have a expert, water expert may not have within the team, but they always consult an external expert. But here what happens is most of the planning team, we come across, they said, I can do climate, I can do water, I can do economy, I can do TOD, etc., etc. And that's one. Second is we lack a lot of ground level evidences. Even if you, because what you see, and that's the challenge we am seeing in many other, some of the cases. When you look at some of the Google image or satellite remotely sensed image, something which looks an water body may not be an water body in the revenue record. And actually, so we need to, if you really want to conserve, there has to be certain amount of evidence generated. I think last year or last year, thankfully a good water body census was carried out and it is published to certain extent. And but when you go to ask a planning team, do you know there is a water census carried out in this? They say, nahi, kisne kiya? Those kind of ignorance, etc. But I completely agree with you. And slowly there is a recognition, there is a realization, thankfully. So people are slowly realizing that that we need to respect. This year particularly, we are seeing a lot of protest. Some of my colleagues, I saw Dr. Alka here and many others, they're actually protesting for the green. They're also protesting for recovering water bodies. Slowly there is a realization these are assets, just not for fun. These are assets, provide us valuable ecosystem services. So I think we need to do this conversation not with planner talking planner, but get town planners, hardcore departmental planners, and slowly get engaged with them. Probably we will be able to do this. Also, many cities do planning through consultants. So we need to also get them on board and tell them that there is a life beyond road and land uses, etc., etc. I hope I responded to your question.
Yeah, I have another question, Mukta. Do you have a speaker with you?
Hi, Shashwat, can you hear me? I hope
Yes,
so.
yes.
So, hi,
I-
this is Mukta and I work at CPR2. I was fascinated by the last slide and the sort of IRC guidelines. And I was thinking that there is just so much conversation around risk resilience in the practice space right now. Almost, you're talking about consultants, tons of consultants sort of picking up on this funding opportunity or whatever you call it on these sort of risk resilience frameworks. And we know that that is quite disconnected from planning practice, like your talk outlined. So as a teacher, is there a pedagogical gap that planning schools are rushing to cover, or are we going to have a time lag of 20 years before we can address resilience? It's just curiosity at my end.
See the planning school. Thanks, Mukta. This is another very important question. Because planning school traditionally have taken up certain models of urban planning, and that is being taught in a form of physical planning. There are certain the process of planning that in a formal sense of planning that we have inherited or we are trying to bring in vis-a-vis the elements, the complexities that we have, that discourses we are still, schools, there is a definite need in pedagogic shift. Because if you see many of the planners or if you go to some of the planning school, we are still into those 80s or 70s model of how the plan or the land use need to be done. And the second part of it, that whenever we are looking at, a lot of work has been happening in risk and resilience. And I also had a chance with had a conversation with some of these funding agencies, particularly IFIs and global development agencies. They are particularly they understand the problem. The challenge is there that land use planning tools are typically long tenure. To really get a, for example, I was giving an example of Bhopal master plan and this lake master plan, where we had to spend almost 10, 12 years beyond our scope of, but because we are an academic university, some of us wanted to. So many of these agencies are not really keen to enter into a long term, because both plan and those elements coming together. So you see a lot of quick, short and sweet resilience plans, but some of you can go back to see what happened to Surat. In 100 Resilient Cities days, you have a Surat, you had a city resilience officer, and I just recently went to Surat, and you see those very well done, very well intentioned plan don't even feature in the municipal budget anymore, because Surat's priority has changed, and they are doing something, of course, in the green and other pond. So my response to is that bringing this long-term concern, and also the agencies who are interested in short-term, somewhere we have to blend more cleverly, and allow people who to coming out of this engagement earlier and then taking long term. So the word, either you have to do long localization and mainstreaming. So that is the professional part. And of course, something need to be done. I think planning school in general is not engaging with the climate resilience. Because I go to a couple of school, there are some ceremonial or very workshops and saying climate, but what is the role? Because in climate, if you deconstruct, there is a large part of it. It is about meteorology and atmospheric science, which many of us are not trained. Part of it is more, negotiation and tariff and economics. The most part of it, where how land use planning tools engage with the climatic response, that is also the kind of fiscal tool that needs to come out, where the planning schools are definitely not engaging. I hope I answered your question, Mukta.
Yes, absolutely. Fascinating. Thank you.
Shashwat, are there any questions here? Well, before somebody raises their hand, I just wanted to pick up on what you just mentioned. It triggered me some very interesting stuff that you talked about in your talk, in your presentation. Just before you move to the empirical cases, you put up a slide differentiating between statutory and non-statutory plans. And that is something that I think, building on what I think perhaps Mukta was referring to, is that this whole bunch of plans that are being produced by the, I wouldn't call it non-statutory processes, but non-state actors, if I may say, various kinds of developmental agencies and other kind of things. I mean, I'm so pleased that you have put it up there and then made it a point of conversation, because besides saying that they are non-statutory plans, they're also very often programmatic plans, in the sense like they have very short time horizon in comparison to the long-term horizon that you were talking about for the statutory master plan. Now, the question of how they get integrated is a bigger challenge, but something that we should deal with in these conversations. And I hope that you would come back with some thoughts on the basis of your own exposure to the planning practice. But I'm interested in that specific part where, you mentioned about some of these tools that you could bring in. I mean, we have a whole range of tools. Now there is with this increased awareness about this environmentally sensitive plants, you have this whole bunch of work, knowledge products that are coming out. A very recent one is this very comprehensive book or volume that was put together by NIUA, National Institute of Urban Affairs. Now this whole range of tools are available there. What is the kind of challenging? Is there something to do? What I want you to do is to sort of reflect on the institutional cultures. surrounding the statutory master planning process. Because very often, while we have these fantastic ideas that should be implemented by these statutory agencies, or otherwise those state agencies that are entrusted with implementing or giving effect to this statutory master planning, what is, in your view, preventing them from bringing these various tools and elements? Besides, some of those very interesting ideas that you just mentioned about periodical review of these plans, and then see whether they are working or not. So what I'm trying to sort of, get you to think about is that, is it something to do more to do with the institutional cultures and ecosystem out there, or is it just the practice of planning tools themselves?
No, I think this, thanks, Srinivas. I think this is both the institutional culture as well as planning as a practice, because most of cases what happens is many of these tools, and I was also part of that tool making mafia at times. These are all very, top-down tools, and we spend a lot of time in those tools being coming up from north to south direction. We have not invested enough understanding from the ground realities of these plans and the kind of institutional structure, the human resources, the capacity. And most of these cases, this needs to be bottom up, because you'll see it's very easy to see. If you remember the old days of environmental planning, we said isko ek wo kar do, buffer kar do. And that buffer, what it means, we have not understood when we sat in Ahmedabad or Delhi. But when you go to the ground, you realize the buffer means somebody's buffalo, somebody's homeland, somebody's this, and how do you, so those elements, so it's very easy to say, okay, we'll make a water sensitive or river sensitive plan, but it has to start rolling out from the ground level. And where the ground level means is where the rubber hits the ground, go to that local area, see what are the kind of challenges, and then slowly. The second thing what I see is that we still do not have neither resources to implement a plan, forget about environmental sensitive plan. So as a result, most of these local bodies or town plan making bodies, what they do is that use that plan not for public purpose, not for infrastructure development, but it's just for building use permission. So that culture which is pervaded, so that needs to come out, that what is the purpose of this plan, what are the key performance indicator of this plan and associated institution and other. Some silver lining has happened. Some of you have already seen, after high level committees report, there are certain resources of accessing increased access to urban planners. Certain resources are being also given to prepare urban knowledge hubs. These are some of the initial things the government has really responded well, but we have a long way to go. I mean, we're just starting to understand that these are not the plans, or this type of plans are not going to help us in any way.
Right. Thank you. I think there's one part that you missed, but you can respond to it later. But when you said that we are considering certain kind of amendments in terms of allowing or enabling periodical review. I mean, after 3 years or 4 years, review of the statutory master plan. When you were thinking about it, or when you were deliberating on this in whatever committees that you're sitting in, did you consider its feasibility or viability, considering the variety of town planning legislations that are there across the states? Now, you can hold on to it, because that would be unfair to respond to this question immediately.
No, just quickly to respond, because I missed out, because this is not as a HLC, but it is as a professional work that we as from CEPT Research Foundation we are doing. And we are looking at some of the Town Planning Act, because as you know, majority of these acts were there in 60s and 70s when India was hardly urbanized. So these had certain element. So we are actually at least two state acts are trying to looking at it more seriously, how this kind of planning needs to be more dynamic and certain, because without making this legal framework, this kind of statutory plan, whatever you make as this, will not going to work. So this is a work in progress. I hope something, some changes would be visible in a shorter time. Over to you, Srinivas.
Which are the states, Shashwat, quickly? Those state legislations that you're working on?
State of Uttar Pradesh and Tamil Nadu.
Tamil Nadu. Excellent. So there are a whole bunch of, it looks like you are giving provocative answers because suddenly these questions have become from 6 to 16. So let me go by one. I may skip one or two here. So is there any place for public participation in the planning process? This is by Jayanta Ganguly. In most urban areas of India, local governments do not really practice democracy. That's a bit unfair characterization, but not to mention the spirit of 74th Amendment. Perhaps you may want to sort of, at least in defense. No. Yeah, that is another question. A lot of these ULBs do not even make plans. But you may want to defend the planning professions by highlighting how the very process itself insists on public participation, inviting objections.
Yeah,
No, over to you, Shashwat.
very quick question. I'll not give the answer to the second part of it, but the first part is, it has come all the way. I know it, all kind of planning. Then it came to no objection because there is no concept of participation. If I harm you, there is come an object. To certain extent of participation that had happened, but I'm sure this needs to come up, and new planning legislation framework in allowing more and more, and some of the new frameworks are allowing at least 3 or 4 some good lessons we learned from Delhi Master Plan, which NIUA is doing, and also they have partnered with some of the civil society organization, because one thing is that many people don't understand what the master plan is. You take a copy of Delhi Master Plan to your own residential society, almost your society chairman will not know what is to expect. And so what we are actually doing is called Know Your Plan. It's like KYC kind of document. And it requires to tell and to school children to say that what is this plan and what it does. Our one Dr. Puttu Raju had done this in Goa during Goa regional plan. And it is it was also done quite well in Singapore, because these are all kind of thing. If you don't know what is to expect, so you go and look at plan and start making that. So one this DDA planner was telling me they received 36,000 objection, and 36,000 objection, out of that 33,000 about pani nahi aata hai, kachra nahi saaf hota hai, and XYZ. So that is because we have to also increasing the literacy of your planning process so that participation comes. Otherwise, it's like, you do it in some ITC Mayur Narmada and call some people, and what we call is Karthik calling Karthik. I am telling Srinivas plan needs to be environmentally sensitive, and Srinivas agreeing and saying, Shashwat plan needs to be sensitive. We have to break that. Thankfully, Institute of Town Planners are now really warmed up. And we are suggesting them to do an open door and open houses. If ITPI has a long network of planners and other, if they open up to schools, reach out at least once a weekend, or tell people, student, colleges, that this is what plan means, probably we'll do certain amount of good in this area.
That's right. Well, that's a very optimistic note on that ITPI getting warmed up. And how warmed up it is something that is something open for debate. But quickly on that front, in terms of the public participation part, it's nice that you mentioned about know your statutory plan, KYS, or whatever. So there are some colleagues here who are putting together a publication for a really long time, partly because of my own issues with giving it time, but it's a publication that we are really excited about, is Demystifying Master Plan. Something that you would see, and which includes that distinction between statutory and non-statutory, but as well as adding the other dimension about the programmatic aspect of it, as well as the institutional cultures issue. I hope that we will get it out soon. But in the meantime, there is a very interesting question, something that we are familiar with in Gujarat. Why sub-regional plans, district development plans, and village development plans are not accommodated in these discussions about master planning process? Is there something that you would like to say quickly about it?
Yeah, very quickly, because this is a scales issue and there are a lot of institutional issues which, for example, a town plan, when you prepare a larger plan with multiple institutions, sub-regional, regional, now it happens is that who is the anchor institute? Because you have to, we did it in Tamil Nadu, we counted about 29 state department, and also there are about 7-8 parastatal central agencies like railways, etc. So bringing them on board is a really large challenge unless until we have a framework. So most of the cases we struggle to bring them together, because this form of plan that we are talking about is initiated by typically an urban development department or a town planning department, which is, that. So some state which is little more realistic and accepted is something in Gujarat, because it has a large town planning department with large number of officials. So some element of coordination happens at the district level, which is not in other state anyway. The number of planner and planning entities are not so strengthened in that.
Right. I think that is, when it comes to that, I don't know if you agree, but I think Maharashtra and Gujarat are in the forefront, particularly because you're absolutely right when you say that there is no legal and institutional framework that gives them legitimacy when you prepare these sub-regional plans or otherwise district development plans, but then they are not necessarily always spatial plans. They tend to be very often budgetary plans, particularly at the district level and village development plans, because there is a framework under the 73rd, 74th Constitutional Amendment to prepare those plans, but they are not often spatial plans to respond to environmental concerns, particularly around water. But that is something that we need to relook at. I think that's the takeaway perhaps, is to look at how the 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment and the compliant legislations accommodate or can accommodate the existing frames for developmental planning, can accommodate these environmental concerns. Unless if you have something more to add, I have Mr. R. Srinivas. I think he's the one who gave the first talk in these 3 talks, who has this very interesting question about how do we go about, though it is something that we keep encountering, how do we go about protecting floodplains? Very important question, particularly with the Andhra Pradesh state going back to Amaravati plan within the urban area, wherein strong political stakes may hamper enforcing of zoning regulations.
Yeah, first is that there is a old saying, if you want to manage something, you have to first measure. Presently, there is no evidences, these are very, what we do is that using some 500, 100-meter buffer and saying floodplain. First is that what is the floodplain, and whether a map of that is existing itself is a question. And Srinivas very well, we have struggled during CRZ days, preparing a map,
Yes.
including I was showing in the drainage channels. These cannot be done with some SRTM and, quickly, hurriedly drawn up. So it has to do, we have to invest. Once you know, then only probably we'll be able to start working out, because political interests come later, but more importantly, the plot owners. These floodplains over a period of time have been, the pattas have been distributed. There are owners who are residing. So there are some framework. So the good starting point for conversation is not hypothetically, but saying that this is what the planes are, these are the functions are, and then probably a dialogue can be started with this.
You're absolutely right. In fact, the key part, I was just going to ask you, but I think it still matters, because you should be able to measure and articulate clearly what you mean by floodplains, particularly in such a varied context. And then you deal with the political interests that Mr. Srinivas is asking about. There could always be middle ground. I hope that it would be. Otherwise, if you don't measure, and then you have this ambiguities where you can thrive with your own interpretations and posture about what should be floodplain zone or otherwise what should not be floodplain zone. So that is a big challenge is to how do you measure this
Yeah, I
one?
think,
And
Srinivas, you can also see some of the lessons from Europe. You know, there are very high dense built closer to the water body, and then there are certain catchment level intervention has been taken. There are some cases in the making room for the river where resettling the whole town, which is of course is a very expensive proposition. There are some experiences, but first thing is that we need to map, measure what we need to protect, because we are just talking about we need to do a green mapping or blue city. But if you ask what is the level of your green cover, you'll get 10 data. How many trees, and those similarly, where are your blue cover? So those things first we need to fix before we start this, intention
Right.
to protect them.
yeah. Maybe because we are in this season where we are having this intense rainfall, there are plenty of questions about this urban floods. And I think even the previous talk had several questions about urban floods. And I'm glad you put it up, that slide about, turning it into, what was that? Street burst.
Cloudburst,
Street
street, yeah.
And I hope that's quite sounds very interesting. But I think if you remember, Ahmedabad itself has tried this. Is it not earlier at some point?
No, Ahmedabad has not started because this is something which is GIFT is doing, and some of these are also being tried in Outer Ring Road. Certain amount of they call it Sponge Street in the area. Some of the urban designer, like I don't know whether Akash is in this call, Akash Hingorani, he's doing some of this work in that area. So I think some of the planners and designers are warming up to. Thankfully, IRC has come up with a good guideline, and
What is
also
that? IHC.
IRC, Indian
Indian Roads Congress. Okay.
Congress, SP 42 or 48 something. You can just check it up
So
on this.
there is a code for designing urban streets. Very interesting. Okay. So I'm just trying to skip to because there are plenty of a few questions on the floods, urban floods. But unless you want to, share some thoughts about the institutional constraints of implementing some of these really straightforward solutions that you have. GIFT City implementing those kind of urban street.
See, GIFT is a completely greenfield master plan. The problem challenges here institutionally, most cases except for Gujarat and few other, the urban local body doesn't prepare a plan. The plan is prepared by an urban development agency, or we call is Vikas Pradhikaran, and their intention is more peripheral. And so peripheral action is often, showing certain implication in the core town. Like for example, state like Uttar Pradesh, even urban local bodies, the municipal act doesn't even allow them to make a plan. There is no mandate, okay, for an urban local body. So there are a lot of these institutions, there are a lot of legacy aspects of in this, so which is creating. The second is that plan, what we are preparing, that needs to also, get to be fed up, or, there are certain data which requires, like, if you're protecting, like, for example, flooding is itself has a lot of challenge. Like, you want to protect your plan for 1 in 30 years, 1 in 50 years, or 1 in 100 years. That return period will also change the extent of your area. And those kind of research, and it's also a lot of analysis, economic analysis are required. To what extent we need to protect our the drainage or this thing. So those conversations are, so we do like a mass malarial control, like buffer bana do and usko hum log plan mein dal denge. But that's is a bit of a blind shot, according to me, in that.
Now, in any case, I think, do we still use those 1 in 50 years return flood to design those? I mean, that would be really.
Nobody does. We have just this guidelines that comes in 3 meter, 9 meter buffer.
Because post climate change, I think it would be totally ridiculous to go with those kind of things, because that, I don't know if you're familiar with that very famous principle really holds. the stationarity principle is dead. Now, guys are quite familiar with it
No,
because
that's I know. No,
I
that's
keep
but
bombarding them.
no, that is correct. But you know, instead of completely this intensities are changing, but you always can actually start looking at some of the change. I mean, anticipated kind of a rainfall intensity for next 30. That's in the near time. You can always start doing. Anyway, it is not going to be 100% proof. But there has to be certain mechanism which you can actually plan, because it's anyway we are entering into an uncertain domain where the changes, intensity, covered. So go for age-old good practices.
Right. Well, there are some questions about water census. Is it relevant? First level, I'm adding that part, but because it says that the census is extremely crude, but I think bringing down it's the water census that Ministry of Jal Shakti has recently released, I guess, but I do not mean that. Is there a water census different one?
Yes, MOJS, same one.
Right. So we are supposed to see there is one of those things that we are trying to do is the kind of planning practices that are made obligatory in statutory planning process. For instance, as you just mentioned about, it depends on how well you measure. So exactly that way, how well do you gather data about your city to make those kind of plans that we're talking about? For instance, water fundamentally requires a 3D kind of survey. All said and done, you need to bring in the elevation part into it to consider the kind of drainage channels and other kind of sensibilities that we're talking about. Is it really practiced in the cities now, and to what extent? Because to my knowledge, it's only post-earthquake 4 cities that have used that kind of comprehensive survey to prepare master plans. So if you could comment on that aspect of
No,
measuring.
I think simple answer is we don't. But some of the very good examples of we came across, like cities are developing something called urban observatory. For example, I just visited Johannesburg Urban Observatory. That's called Gauteng City Region. It's one of the very good practices, because this data will not happen as a magic wand. You have to create a framework, provide resources. So what this city region observatory does is they create a periodic survey, also use some of these data which are available. And it's not, and then because what happens here is master planning is like a wedding event in India. Only when the master plans happen, then they suddenly announce, then they will hire a consultant and then load everything on the consultant. And then consultant will, as you know, with all the constraint, they will do some data churning, etc., etc. But if it's a full-time job, and if the cities need good planning, if you aspire to do a plan that is responding, so both in terms of socio-economic, physical, and natural resources, we have to invest, create that framework. Once and twice, in case of there is an eventuality like earthquake or there is a massive flood, some responses come out, but it is a full time. You need an data observatory which is mapping and monitoring and feeding to those details. Presently, most of the master planning systems they don't have those, not even a good statistician or an economist to deal with that.
Right. So there is a question from the room here. Yeah, please go ahead.
So, hello, sir. So I have a short question. So I wanted to ask, if we call a master plan, because you were talking about we need to understand its limitation. So if we call JNNURM those first generation of those centrally sponsored scheme that invested hugely in developing urban infrastructure, and the second one is, of course, Smart City and Amrut. So my question is, in terms of, I would say, convergence of these programs within the master plan, how do you see the difference between how JNNURM approached in kind of implementing the infrastructure within the master plan? I think the convergence and the Amrut or the Smart City. I mean, do you think there are like the similarities, or there is like Amrut has attempted to do some things very differently? So I just wanted to understand the kind of difference between the two, if you
See,
can.
I think one distinct departure what Amrut has taken, and I think I saw Mr. Srinivas's question also. Mr. Srinivas is the right person. what Amrut has started there are two things. One is called GIS based master planning. A first thing to, start getting, although there are a lot of things need to improve, but it has created certain amount of first map and created a GIS based layer. Some cities are doing it, I mean, they have converged it and doing it better. Some cities are still struggling. The second challenge here is that many people think, that mapping is planning. Yeah, so as we all say that all plans are maps, but not all maps are plans. So there is a big departure gap between geoinformatics and planners. So if you give it to the GIS specialists, they will map and say, this is the plan. So there is this kind of misconception. And when Srinivas, you write your demystifying plan document, please make sure that this is going into that. So this is what happening, the second thing which actually started also thanks to Mr. Srinivas and TCPO team, they also created something called sub-scheme to create a planning hierarchy. This is called sub-scheme for local area plan or town planning scheme. So this is what they started, and taking this advantage, some smart states as converts this GIS-based master plan with their statutory plan. And that's a good sign, but it is just at the bottom of the pyramid. It is not giving, we're not going to give an immediate result, but some data is available. You have to, slowly make them. So that's the thing I think is how Amrut has created that opportunity for urban planners and everybody to come forward. And there are certain data layers, but the flip side of it, these are once you mapped and then forget about it, is not going to work. Once the map is done, there has to be periodic data revision, upscaling, etc., etc. Otherwise, it will be as good as a old check. It doesn't work in that sense.
So Shashwat, I mean, just to quickly, and this is something that I keep negotiating with my colleagues here, is that you should also clarify whether all these plans that are prepared, like JNNURM plans, they should be
GIS-based master, not JNNU.
what GIS-based master, whatever, whichever plans that are prepared, other than statutory master plan, should comply with the master plan, right? The statutory plan.
See, what has happened, the history is that the statutory plan didn't have any component of infrastructure. And as you know, all of you know why JNNURM was kind of a stellar success, because if you take up any statutory plan document, there is no investable project. There are some estimate of water demand and XYZ. So JNNURM, and also before that, there was a World Bank city development strategies to prioritize some of the infrastructure investment. So that's what it took over. But now many states are looking at this GIS-based plan under Amrut and statutory plan. They're bringing them together. So that's a good, that innovation happened at the city and state level. So that is a good beginning, because so that you have advantage of a strategic or investment plan, and that is also overlaid with. The problem is the strategic plan or that level of plan is that they're good in capital investment, but you have to run them. Their operation, maintenance, and sustenance would depend on how they are linked, and also your ability, whether you will be able to capture land values, and where your these two convergence of plan and investment plan on a land use plan would be quite interesting to see.
Right. So quickly, there's your mafia comment attracted a question here. So also as a one-time participant in the mafia mentioned by Professor Saswath, it will be great if a publication for the lay public, I mean the general citizen, about FAQs of urban planning. Is it something that you?
Yeah, I think this is again that when you said that, demystifying urban planning, my first response was that who is going to read this? So
Yes.
only your academia research. So you have to document. One is like in Netherlands, there was if you go to some of these local bodies, you have to go and the planner has to go and tell the community that who am I? And what value that I'm going to bring as an urban planner. So maybe, you have one demystifying urban planning for enlightened souls, but you take a book which can you go and take your society chairman and somebody, understand that. That would be, role of urban planner in, I had a very interesting story heard from a former chief town planner of Haryana. So when he gone back to village, so the doctor, if somebody graduated from medicine, say that I'm going to treat my village man, somebody done something. So then his term came. So he said, what are you going to do? What are you going to contribute to the village as an urban planner? So whatever he said, nobody could understand. So then the sarpanch said, मुझे लगता है कोई काम का नहीं है. Okay, so we have to really create those kind of knowledge product to tell urban planners that what we do, how we make certain contribution. Those things need to be there, and which is easily understandable.
Yeah, I certainly, I think there are, at least a takeaway for us. It's certainly our own demystifying master plan is targeted at policymakers and some of those urban planners at least. But this is a different enterprise altogether. To make it legible for common citizenry that could be used. And that is something that it's an entirely different enterprise, and I hope that we'll be able to invest in it. But eventually, I see there are plenty of these non-governmental organizations, particularly these agencies like Praja, who are involved in that space, and they are aware of it. I think there are a fairly good number of publications out there that at least responds to the some of those frequent questions from the citizens about master plans, certainly. There is a quick question. I mean, it's an open-ended question, something that I don't know whether you can share some of those thoughts about it. Do you think it would help to introduce more service level benchmarks for blue-green infrastructure tied to financial mechanisms similar to the ones that exist for water supply, sewerage, and solid waste management? I'm very skeptical about these labels about blue and green, but then I'll keep it to myself, but feel free to respond.
I have not really looked at that subject, so I'll like to skip the question because service level benchmark itself was a good start point, but how it has affected, and particularly to measure blue and green infrastructure itself is a lot of methodological challenges I foresee, but I'll skip
Well,
this.
I mean, the kind of stormwater drainage designs that you mentioned about to deal with street cloud burst kind of thing, that itself could be perhaps called as green infrastructure. But then
No, Ajgal, today in the name of green infrastructure, some people are driving even concrete blocks.
that's what I'm saying.
So you have to be a
So
little careful. That's what
those labels are somewhat, are somewhat devious, or otherwise it's very difficult to justify them in all circumstances. Now, with that, there are, I don't know if you have some questions that you want to respond. You can see them, right? Question Q&A there that was put up there. In any case, we shot beyond our time, 5 o'clock. If you don't have any questions that you want to respond, Shashwat, we can close this session. Do you have any?
No, I have. I think there are quite a few questions. Are there anyone? I see
we
somebody raised their hand. I see one person. I think if there is a question, we can respond.
I don't know whether we can. Nimisha Paul, is there Arnaz? Can you bring her in? Nimisha Paul, could you please put in your question in the Q&A space? I don't think we can accommodate bringing her in. Right.
Okay, I think.
In any case, I think we should close it. Perhaps she could write to you directly because you did put up your email and other coordinates on the last slide. I hope she had a chance to see it. But let me just tell you, Shashwat, these are the kind of sessions that make us feel like we should do more of these practitioner sessions, even though you are not entirely boxed into practitioner category, but then you have provoked and then you made us think about in several ways that we did not think before. And I should also share with you another distinction of your talk. I think you almost hit a century here in terms of attracting participants. You were in the late 90s, but if you add up those attended in person in the room, you did hit a century. So you should celebrate that part. And if you come when you come next to Delhi, if you let us know, then we will celebrate it together. But
Your
thank you very
party-
much.
Your party is anyway spent, I mean,
Yes, I owe you one quite a bit, certainly. So please do let us know. If you don't let us know and then you just fly over us, then we can't help it. So thank you very much, Ashwath.
thank you, Srinivas, everybody in the hall and the audience. Thanks so much.
And thank you to audience for having been there. And then almost, I mean, they're one of those few talks, even though we are past 5 o'clock, we have more than 50 participants joining us. Thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you more often here on this platform. Thank you, Shashwat. Have a good one.